good morning, everybody. Welcome to the free virtual skill up about Tableau Prep today. My name is Tim, and I will be your host for today. We will be talking about Tableau Prep, and I'll give you a brief introduction to the tool today. Who are we? We are Biztory. We are a consultancy company specialized in Tableau software. We are active in multiple countries, such as Belgium, France, Germany, and the UK, and more countries. We have about 50 consultants active in the field, and what we basically do are services and licenses both for Tableau Desktop and Tableau Server. This is the first of a series of free virtual skill ups. I will invite you all in the next few days to join the other sessions as well, which will be given by my colleagues. First of all, before I continue, could somebody in the chat confirm that you can all hear me, and then we'll just go. All right. Thanks, Bram, for confirming. We will start with the session. If there are questions, they can be asked via the chat function, and people can raise their hands. So if there's time at the end, we can pick up a few questions and discuss them. But let's start with the start. Tableau Prep. What is Tableau Prep? Well, it says prep in the name, and actually it is what it does. Tableau Prep is a tool to prepare your data. And I know most of you who have joined the session work with data on a daily basis, and they do know that data is not always perfect the way it comes to them. Tableau, in that sense, is a sort of ETL tool, which will allow you to connect to your data, apply some transformations to it, and then go to Tableau and start visualizing. So the screen we are looking at now is the opening screen. What is there to see? When you open Tableau Prep, you will see the flows you have opened recently, together with a few sample flows. Now, when you start working, you can continue working on an existing flow, but most of the time, you will always start by connecting to the data. We will discuss that in a minute. If you're new to Tableau and Tableau Prep, you need to be aware that the online community of Tableau is very big. That also means that there are a lot of resources available for self-study and continuing learning after today. As you can see, when opening Tableau Prep, you can go and learn from videos online. They also have these nice documents available on how to start with Tableau Prep, and there are quite a few blogs around on how to work with Tableau. Another thing, Tableau Prep comes for free with a Tableau Desktop license. So if you have a Tableau Desktop license, you are capable of installing Tableau on your computer yourself. However, it is a separate install. So it's not the same program. It's two different software. So you can recognize it on the fact that the official Tableau Desktop logo is the white with the blue pluses. And for Tableau Prep, it is a blue with white pluses. All right, let's start. So as I said, Tableau Prep is made for those cases where you want to connect to data and do some transformations to your data before you start visualizing. So I'm going to start by clicking on the top left on Connect to Data. Those who work with Tableau Desktop today will recognize a lot of parallel connections there. Tableau is known for being very versatile in the context that it allows you to connect to a wide variety of data sources. Also in Tableau Prep, they are structured the way they are in Tableau Desktop. The most famous ones you see here at the top, and then all the server connections underneath it. All of you work with Microsoft Excel files. Most of you work with CSV files, so you can connect it to a text file. The statistical file means .spss or SAS files. You can connect to them as well. But then in most companies, if you really connect to your BI or IT infrastructure, you will be using the server connections. As there are the Amazon connections, for example, Box for file sharing, you can connect to it, Dropbox, familiar for most of them. You can even connect to Google Drive if your company or yourself, you make and store your data files, be it Excel, text files, etc., on a Google Drive. You can connect to it. Microsoft SQL, Snowflake, Spark, Teradata. And even if you don't see the connection available here, you could try and make an ODBC connection, which is very handy as well. At the very end, we will discuss another thing. Imagine that you want to connect to a connection which isn't listed here. There might be solutions to that as well. But first of all, let's start by connecting to some data. For the first example, I will connect to a Microsoft Excel. I will first start with giving you an overview about how the interface looks and behaves like, and then we will jump into real-life cases about how you could treat your data in Tableau Prep. So here on my desktop, I have one of these typical export files you might be working with. I click Open. What just happened? In the top left, you see that Tableau has made a connection to the Excel file, which is on my desktop. If the Excel file would have multiple tabs, they would be shown here. But let me quickly go back to give you an idea about the data we are working with. So we are connecting to a little file which contains 4 fields: a customer ID, a product name, a price or a sales price, and the country. In a later exercise, we will be combining them, but for now, let's explore how you can deal with your data in Tableau Prep. If there's only one tab in your Excel file, Tableau will automatically add the first tab in your view. When you click on it, there are already a few things you can do. As with most analysis, if you don't need specific columns and fields, you should and you can leave them behind as soon as possible. So by clicking on the input node, we actually get a brief overview of the data which resides in the little Excel. In this case, you just came from saying customer ID, product, price, and country. Also, you can configure the data types. Those of you who work with Tableau Desktop already probably know already the differences, but let me do a quick recap. So if you're dealing with text or string labels, you can set it to ABC. If you want to work with dates as dates, you can set it to date, date and time, a number which has decimals, a full number, an integer, or a number who has decimals, and you can put it to decimal. Do notice that you can already immediately at the first screen rename your fields if you feel like doing so, or if you want to give them a more interpretable name. And also the Tableau gives you a very brief preview of the values which reside in these columns. So for example, I here can see in the customer ID field, the customer 1, 2, and 3 are there for the products. It gives a few sample values, A, B, and C. On top of that, the main rule is if you don't need the data, you can already filter it the moment you load your data. So imagine that in this particular case, I want to do an analysis only on the rows for product A. I could already apply a filter here. So let me zoom in. Here on top, you see filter values. Now, how do you use this? Because it is pretty straightforward, but you, as with most things, you need to know how to use it. So imagine that I want to filter on my product. I can say I want to keep all the products which equal A. Why do I write it like this? This is because when you filter in Tableau Prep, at least filter from the calculation, because it's also possible from the interface, as we will see later, it says must return a Boolean value. So defining your filters need to return a true or false outcome. So here I say to Tableau, keep all the lines where product equals A. I'm going to push apply. We immediately see that the filter has been applied to our little data set, that he can only provide the values of A. And if we then continue, I will discuss what I just did in a bit. We here see that I have retained only the rows with A. Okay, so small recap. On loading, you can drop columns if you want by deselecting it here. You can change the data formatting if for some reason Tableau Prep has misinterpreted your data. We can do a rename. We can even apply already some filters to it, and we can see a sneak preview. Now we're connecting to a single table, but we will see later how we can perform a wildcard union. What does that mean? Well, let me go back for a moment. Although we're living in 2020, sometimes data is still pretty fragmented, in that sense that maybe a few of you, be it via email, daily, weekly, monthly, get some exports. It might be that you're doing exports yourself, and that you see yourself having a setup like this, that you have your data in different files or different tabs. And what you don't want to do is every time you get a new file that you need to edit manually. So that's the reason why Tableau has these wildcard unions, which allow to add the data automatically whenever a new file arrives. But we'll discuss that feature in a tiny bit. Then, the data sample. Of course, you will be in situations where you will be dealing with maybe millions, maybe billions of rows. And as you can see, Tableau generates a preview on the spot. This, of course, is possible because as you are building your flow, you are working with only a sample of your data. The exact number it samples here, I cannot say, but as it says, it's based on the number of fields and the field data types, so it will take a default sample. Of course, you could say use all data if your data set isn't that big, but most of the time you want to work on a sample. If you want that data sample to be only 1,000 rows or 10,000 rows, you can set it there. But another very nice feature is the fact that if you really want to do it good, if you want to have a random sample, you can go from quick select to random sample. But as you can see, it will be a little bit smaller and it may have an impact on your performance. But most of the time when I'm working, put it on quick select, let it sample a default amount, and then you are good to go. Then we see here that we applied a little filter to it. We filtered for product A. And as for the whole of Tableau Prep, every change you make is traceable. So you don't need to expect your colleagues or yourself at a later point to visually recognize these filters. No, if you want to see which changes have been applied at a specific step, you will always have a changes step, where you nicely get a summary about what is happening, or where you can even change your filters you have applied. if my boss comes in tomorrow and said, oh, that analysis you did yesterday for product A, please do it again, but for product B, you can click on the edit, change it to B, save, go to my next step. And as you can see, my filter has been adapted. So things to remember, you don't need to work with all your data at all time. You can work with a sample, mainly for performance reasons. Then you can apply filters and you can see the changes here. So we have discussed the connection view. This can differ from connection. It differs whether you connect to an Excel, a CSV. It can change slightly, as we will see in the things that will come. I don't need to change the filter anymore, so I will remove it here. And then let's continue. As you saw, we are actually building a flow. We will connect, perform some transformations, and then we will write it somewhere. Now, when you click the plus, you see I can add a few different nodes to my flow. The most straightforward one, and the one which you will use most of the time, is literally the cleaning step. Let me click that. And as you can see, Tableau adds one step to it. Now, what is all of this? When you're working in Tableau, the good part is that you always still see your data, how it will look in your end result. But we need to focus on the difference between the view we see here at the top and the view we see here at the bottom. In this view here, you actually get a summary of your data. What does that mean? For example, I have customer IDs. I will get all the distinct values of all the customer IDs in my little table. The same for product. I can here see in a glimpse that in the table I have loaded, although it has 33 rows, that it mainly, not mainly, it only has rows for product A, B, C, and D. It not only gives away that these are the distinct values for the product, it also shows me how many rows of that product I have. So here I can nicely see product A has gotten 9 rows, product B has 8 rows, product C has 8 rows, and product D has 7 rows. For price, we see that we have rows with 10, 20, 30, etc. But now I'm also clicking the value. And that's the cool stuff about it, because what Tableau on top of showing the distinct values shows are actually the frequency of which the values appear in your data set. So here you see the little bars. It's actually a mini graph. So A has the highest and the longest bar because it has the most rows. You could do the same thing for price. So let me sort that. So here we see that we have 13 rows with the price of 10, 6 rows with the price of 100, etc., etc. And that's not everything. On top of that, Tableau can also show how the values are linked with each other. Imagine that I want to quickly see which were the customers who had bought product B. I can click on the value, and then he shows me the corresponding rows. Do notice that customer 2, 6, and 10 get highlighted. That means, as we can see in the preview at the bottom, that these customers have bought product B in the little file. We can do it the other way around. I can select Belgium. I see the rows for Belgium. We will talk about the fact that the country values here are a little bit different, and we will look into how we can solve that. But first of all, what else is there to do in the top screen? Well, as with most of the screens, you can rename whenever you want. So if you say customer ID should be customer underscore ID, that's all possible. Sorry, I undid. Let me go back. You can change the product name, the price, etc. You can even change the values in your rows. So if I would decide to call this product A, call this product B, call this product B, call this product C. As you can see, Tableau in real time adapts the values. And again, if you want to change the data formatting, it's all possible here as well. Then, Tableau is made for cleaning. So what we see here is that the values look slightly different. As with all systems with user inputs, it might be that some countries have been typed in wrongly. So what we can do here is actually try to group them. We can do that by clicking on the 3 dots in the column. And as we will see later, we can manually combine them, do it based on the pronunciation, on the common characters, or even on the spelling. But more about that later on. Also, you can drag around your columns however you want to also see that it changes in the preview below. So if I say, I want to have the product in the beginning, just drag it there. Same thing here. You can drag around the columns just to have them the way that you want. All right, what else is there? We can create calculated fields because, of course, we are not stuck with the data which are in our little table. We can create a new one. For example, this export, as you can see at the top left, is from 2019, from the 11th month. So what you could do, this is an okay way, but I will show you in a bit the better way, is to create a calculated field. Let's for now call it year month. And I can hard code it this time. I'll show you in a bit how to do it in a more lean way. I click save. And as you can see, all my rows have nicely gotten the value. Imagine that you want to apply some kind of reduction on the prices. You can create a field, price, let me call it price transformed. I can do price times 0.95, for example, .95, like this, and I add it. So as you can nicely see, when I put it next to each other, the price has been multiplied by 0.95. So as you can see, you quickly do a lot of transformations, and you might wonder like, I did this transformation, but I want to undo it. Do I do Control Z and go all the way back? Well, you could do that, but you will lose changes you want to keep. So here in the left pane, you get an overview of all the changes you have done to your data. Let me click it. So what have we done? We have grouped and replaced the product names. So he nicely says it here, group and replace for product, for values replaced. Then we calculated the year month. So here you see that you created this constant string, being the year and the month number. And we made a column called price transform, where we multiplied the price with 0.95. If you feel like, okay, the product renaming didn't make that much sense, you can or edit it or just simply remove it. And there it is again. I have undone my transformation. Okay, small recap. At the top, you have a summary of your data. It is interactive. By clicking, you get a preview of the data for your specific selection. At the bottom, you get your preview, renaming, sorting, all possible. But of course, before we start building a bigger flow, you will be sharing your files probably. You will be working together with other people. And then it's important that you document very well what you are doing. So before we continue, it now has this meaningless Dutch tab 1. But what you can say is that this node represents the export of 2019-11. And even on top of that, we can add description. This file comes from, in case you want to provide your node with a comment. Also, you can play with the colors. You can think about ways how you would use it. But imagine that they say, okay, connection is good. I'm going green. I'm working on this still, so I'm going to make it the orange color. To also notice that all the steps have a name. So for example, here at the top left, you see it's called clean 1. If you want to give that another name, you can click on it and say, let's call it my cleaning step. As I said, in every cleaning step, you can track your changes. But if you want to be very explicit about it, you could even say create date field and price calculation, for example. You can give up to 200 symbols for the comment. Let me minimize that. Also, do notice that you're relatively free to organize your flow. You can put it wherever you want. Imagine that we are okay with the result. Then, of course, we need to put the data somewhere. We can do that by clicking on the plus sign and by adding an output node. I hear you thinking, where can we write the data to? Well, you can write it somewhere locally on a shared drive, but also on Tableau Server. But for this first demo, we will write it to my desktop. So here you see that the output node has been added. I get a nice full view about how my data set will look like. And here on the left, I will now choose where I want to write it to. So for this source, we're going to save it locally. So I'm going to keep this on save to file. I can browse it where I want to save it. Let me for now just put it on my desktop. I will call it prep session 1. Accept. There's already one called like that, but indeed I want to replace it. And then I can run my flow simply by clicking on the triangle. And if we now go on my desktop, we would see that the file is being written as a hyperfile. Do notice that you can choose what the format is. You can choose writing it to your desktop as a hyperfile, as a TDE file, or as a CSV file. Now, before I continue, there are probably already a few of you thinking like, how could we use this and what would I be connecting to? Well, most of the time, you probably want to save it back to the server so other people can use it. But the one thing I didn't stress enough, and that really demonstrates the potential of this tool, is the following. You see here, Tableau Server. I will show it later to you, but you can connect with Prep to published data sources. Those who work today with Tableau Desktop know that you might have been in a situation where you wanted to perform a join on a published data source, but that you needed to solve your problem using blending. Well, imagine having Tableau Prep, where you connect to the published data sources. You actually can perform the join here, as I will show you later, and you can write it to the server. So that's a huge potential of overcoming some of the limits you might experience today. Good. So we have our first little flow connected to the data. We did some cleaning steps, and we written it to our desktop. All right, let me undo this and go back. Now, how do I deal with multiple files? Let me quickly show the files again. I now only just connected to one little file on my desktop, but I have monthly exports. I want to have all this data nicely in one table for my analysts or for myself to go analyzing. So how do I easily combine all these files into one? And we will now demonstrate it with 5 little dummy Excels. But in reality, you can make connections to SQL, Google Sheets, and Excel, and combine them the way you want. So Tableau Prep is capable of joining, unioning, pivoting all sorts of data connections and bring it together for analysis. I will now show you the okay way how to do a union, and then I will show you the wildcard union. So here we go again. I'm going to click Microsoft Excel. I'm going to find the files on my desktop. While holding Shift, I select them all and I click Open. In the top left, you see that Tableau has connected to all of the sheets. And as I mentioned, if there is only one tab, he will automatically put them there. So by clicking on them, I also see which file we are looking at. So this one is 2020-01, so I could call it 2020-01. Which one is this? 2020-02. 2019-12. You get the point, but for completeness, 1911. All right, so these files have the same data format, more or less. They're the same data, just from different time period. So theoretically, you should be able to union all these fields, which means putting them on top of each other to create one big file with all your data. How do we do that? You can take the data connection and drag it on your other node. And do notice that I get the choice to do two things. I could join it, which would not make sense in this particular case. So I will choose to union it. A union node arises in my prep flow, and I can continue doing it, adding my other sources. You see, I hover, join, union, and add. But in this case, I want to add it to the union, and I do it for the two remaining fields as well. To notice that we can drag around the nodes how we want it. All right, what is there to see in the union? Well, it's a very important screen because although you assume that all your files may have the same format, most of the time in reality, it is not the case. So what do we see here? It's a lot of colors. It looks like a color book, but it has an actual meaning. All right, here in the settings tab, we see which inputs we are unioning. In our case, unioning 5 files of 5 months. However, in the ideal world, we would see nothing here. But what Tableau Prep is telling us, like saying, these 4 files, being these one respectively, there we have this country field, whereas in the orange file, which is our January file, it's called differently. And as you can see here, let me zoom in, they don't align, which practically means that our union is not being executed neatly. There is a mismatch in the column names. Now, solving this is rather easy. I can decide to rename my countries column to country to make the union work. So here you see it. What I can do is I just click in the country field. Let me zoom in. And I enter. And all of a sudden, this disappears, which means, let me add a cleaning step. that I now nicely have unioned all of my files, which is great. I don't need to do it manually. I don't need to Ctrl+Z, Ctrl+V all the data into one Excel or whatever. To also notice that Tableau provides us information of where the row is coming from. So if I select this little row here, I can still see that that row came from this file. I can here see that this row came from that file. And that actually gives us a nice way to even create a field with the notion of time. Because, and let me go back for clarity, the only notion of time resides in the file name here. Because in an ideal world, you would have a column here which says 2019-11 or just a date or a year and a month value, but it's not there. So how can you overcome that? So I will go back. And what we can do is actually making use of this metadata field to create a new field, which is very nice. So what we can do is create a new calculated field by clicking on create calculated field. And I'm going to call it year. Now, the year is in the table name value. So theoretically, I can parse it out. The only thing I need to know is from which symbol my year starts and what the length of the string is. So if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we need to start at the 8th symbol, parse 4 out of it. So what we can do with this function, let me zoom in a bit, mid, I can refer to the table names and then tell it start at the 8th symbol and then give me back a string of length 4. Let me see whether that worked. Haha, there it is. You see how quickly we made a column with the year just based on the fact that Tableau Prep loads in the file names. Let's do this the second time, but this time for the month. I here have the notion of month in the file name. So again, I click create calculated field. I will call it month this time. And again, I will make use of the mid function. If you see me making use of functions you don't know and you want to work with it after the session, do know that whenever you are in a calculated field editor, you actually have the function library at your disposal just by minimizing or maximizing this little screen. So when I here use the mid function and you don't know how to use it, you can easily find how to use it because it literally has a description on the right side on how to use it. So here, you want to parse out a value. Let me minimize it from the table names. 1, 2, 3, 4, 13 symbol, then length 2, because it's these little 2 symbols we want to parse out. I click apply, save, and there you have it. I have a column with year and month. And then we could even go further, depending on how you want to play with it later in Tableau. You can concatenate these ones. You could write it in one calculation if you really wanted to. If you want to keep it all separately, you could do that. So now I could take reference the year column, which we just have created, plus hyphen, plus month, just to get a grip on how you can play with your calculated fields. The plus sign is the same thing as the ampersand in Excel. It's used for concatenating string values. So if I now click OK, on top of that, I have my year month. Okay, let's pause for a moment. You will see yourself doing all these transformations in the beginning, and you might not be secure that your end result will look the way you want it. What you then can do is, of course, write it, as I demonstrated you earlier, to your desktop. But if that's a very big file, don't want to write it somewhere, you can also right-click and go for the preview in Tableau desktop, because that's a very nice feature, because if I click it, he runs the flow, of course, to make sure that he has done everything. Now on my first monitor, he opens Tableau Prep, and without actually writing the file, I here now have my data available, and I can do a few checks whether everything looks the way I want it. Price is still listed as a dimension. Those who are familiar with Tableau Desktop might know that you can convert a string to a measure very easily by dragging it, but something goes wrong because it doesn't count distinct, and I don't have the idea that he is really treating it as a measure. So I quickly see that something's wrong. So I'm not going to save it. I'm going to close it. I'm going back to Tableau Prep, and I'm going to investigate what exactly went wrong. Or why not just go from the left to the right to do a full review of the cleanliness of my data. Year, month. Okay, looks clean, no weird values, no null values, etc. Year, okay. Month, looks clean. Customer IDs, okay. We here see that some customers have more rows, but it's perfectly possible. Some customers have bought once, some multiple times. But the thing that bugs me here is the fact that my customer ID, probably because of an export from region X, where the export always goes wrong. So what I can do now is just clean my customer ID before I continue. How do we do that? If I click on customer ID, I can choose to create a calculated field. And I'm going to give it the exact same name. Oh, no, let me not give it the same name. I'm going to give it a new name so you can see the difference. What you can do in Tableau is use the replace function, for example, to do a cleaning step. So what we're going to do right now is, as you can see, the little hyphen symbols in front of my customer IDs, I don't know how they got there, but they're ruining my data, so I'm going to replace it. So what I'm doing, I'm going to tell Tableau Prep, sorry for the zoom, replace this little symbol by nothing. I'm going to click apply and save. Where did it go? I normally should have 2 times customer ID now. Let me put them next to each other. So there they are. Where were the bad ones? At least you can see where it had the hyphen in front of the customer number here. You now nicely have a cleaned column where we replaced it. We don't need this column anymore, actually, so I'm just going to remove it from my flow. Let me scroll down through product, customer ID, my apologies, and it looks okay at first sight. Cool. Next up, the actual products. I have this 3 rows which don't have a value for product. Nah, I'm not going to keep them in my analysis. I'm going to remove them. You don't need to go via the filter and then say if is null, then no. You can just, you could do it that way, of course. You can simply click on, right-click on the null and say, I am going to exclude the rows which have a null value for product. So there I go. I click exclude, and it automatically adapts the preview. I have this weird value, which has 546, I don't know what it is. It can be a test record, which I also want to exclude. But imagine this case that it's actually also a product A. So I can just double click on it, turn it into A, and as you can see, it groups with A, and my data is clean. Then, the prices of my products. If you're a company with business all over the world, you might have not only different notations, but also different currencies. Now, this is the assumption that in the prices column, we're all looking at the prices in dollars. However, we see, and let me zoom in a little bit, that in one of the exports, the dollar symbol was loaded into Tableau Prep, whereas all the other exports didn't have the dollar sign in there. Again, just for getting a grip on it, how can we do it? We can create a calculated field where we say, replace the dollar sign with nothing. I'm going to call it price cleaned. Click apply. I'm going to drag it next to my original pricing. And as you can see, let me zoom in a little bit. I have removed the dollar symbol. Now, cleaning data can be done in two ways, or you can write a formula for it using the create calculated fields, but do know that Tableau Prep out of the box has quite some functionalities for cleaning data. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to click it, and I'm going to set clean. So if I think the dollar sign is considered a letter, I can just go clean, remove letter. No, it doesn't recognize the dollar sign. But the thing I wanted to mention is that you can do a lot of transformations, make it uppercase, make it lowercase. For example, if I want to, and let me drag my country field here, I can uppercase it by simply going to clean, make uppercase. There we go, my countries are uppercased. I can easily make them all lowercase what they were. So I can also remove the spaces, trim it, remove punctuation, etc., etc. All these things which in other software you might need to type a formula for, just out of the box, you can clean your columns by using this. All right. Then, is my data fully cleaned? Okay, my price, I removed it. Let me quickly do it again. So price cleaned. I'm gonna refer to price and say, if you find a dollar symbol, replace it with nothing. Save. Put them next to each other. And I get rid of the original column and I remove it. All right, my data is becoming cleaner, ready for analysis. Now, this one last thing I want to show you before we continue is how we can make use of the intelligent grouping in Tableau Prep to group text values. Because some of you might have experience with fuzzy matching, with all sorts of techniques, counting the symbols, the length, seeing which symbols match. Because what you see here in the explanation I made, in the example I made, we see Belgium written in Dutch way, in France, in French, in English. We see España, France written wrongly, Germany written in a few ways, Spain in Dutch and in English. Now, this is typically, again, if you come from data which is user inputted and there are no input rules applied to where it comes from, you might be in a situation where you have this. And it can take a lot of time, but I want to show you the following. So what you can do is do a manual selection, where, for example, Belgium, all right, I want it to be grouped with these values. Then España, I want to be grouped with España and Spain, not Germany, sorry. Spain. France should be grouped with France written wrongly, and then finally Germany like this. Okay, I hear you thinking you're in luck because these were only a few countries, but if we are doing with like 150 countries business maybe, this is not really a feasible way of doing these kind of things. Then there is also a solution to that. So let me undo my last step. How do we do that? A small recap. I can go to the left, and by clicking the X symbol here, I'm gonna undo my grouping. All right, let's try again. Is Tableau Prep capable of grouping it based on spelling? So by default, and you see how big of an influence the spelling can be on the grouping. So you see he already automatically has done Belgium, France, and Germany correctly. So in this particular case, there are these two values. Voila, I only need to do it for Spain. And my values are grouped again nicely. Now, I hear you thinking, yeah, okay, they're grouped, but the names are still wrong. You now can define how you want the value to be shown in the actual database. So I'm gonna call it Spain. And Germany. And then France, like that. And as you can see, they're again grouped very nicely. And at the end of the day, let's now write it to the server. I can click on output, and this time I will publish it as a data source. On the left, you can select the server you want to write to. In this case, I'm going to write it to the default project. We need to give it a name. I will give it prep session 1, very good name. And I'm going to run the flow. All right, there we are. This file is now available on the server for all those who have access to that specific site. That's pretty cool, huh? Cool. Now, this was the okay way, because imagine that you want to automatically load all these files and you don't want to be in a situation where they call you or they call me, hey, Tim, we've got this new file. It's the file for April. Can you please add it to the data source? What you don't want to see yourself doing is that you need to go to the prep flow again, connect to the new Excel, drag it in, add it to the union, etc., etc. What you can do is let Tableau Prep do that automatically for you. How? I will quickly show you. Let me remove this and all of this. Could have opened a new flow, but as you can see, you can remove connections as well, simply by clicking on the connection and removing them. Good. Going to click my export file. Okay. Wildcard union. Why is it nice and why can it make your life easier? I tell Tableau Prep to look for files in the folder on my desktop called Prep Session. If you have folders and subfolders and another subfolder, you can even ask Tableau Prep to look in folders to check for files. Now, I can specify a specific pattern which the file names need to match. So if I take export underscore asterisk and let it load, there you go. It checked the prep session folder. It checked for files which start with export underscore asterisk, and he found this one. I can click apply, and I can continue. and it's loading. So instead of making the 5 different connections, I am now sure whenever somebody puts a new export file in that specific location, and whenever this flow is being run, I am sure that that new data will be added in my flow. Of course, this is in the assumption that column names nicely would match and that the data formats are exact the same way. So you can see combining it, data flow can be very easy. But another thing is, I don't want to run this flow daily manually. Of course, it is possible, but if you take the management add-on for Tableau Server, we cannot only put the flow on the server, but also schedule flows. So imagine that I, every day, want Tableau Prep to look in a specific folder, be it on a shared drive, and to run automatically. Then I can do it in the following way. So I'm going to add an output, tell it to write it to some location, publish it as a data source. I'm going to select a project, default one. I'm going to give it the name again, Tableau Prep 2 this time. I'm going to run it to test. All right, I have a flow which is running. Now, what I can do is publish this flow to my server. How do we do that? Well, by going to the top, you here see the option Publish Flow. Let's go ahead and do that. There is already a flow with this name. A flow with this name already exists. Publishing the flow will replace the existing flow. I'm totally fine with that. You can give a description. This is the flow which combines all of our exports for each month. Then, of course, when you publish the flow, Tableau Server needs to have access to these files. So in practice, if you have your locally on your desktop a few files and you do this, it won't work. Because as you can see, you can choose to upload the files, or you want to allow Tableau Server to have a direct connection to it. So in a business reality, you would open up Tableau, the drive where the files are, and let Tableau Server connect to it. But now for the sake of the exercise, I'm going to keep it this way. So I'm going to publish, and I click replace. We are currently publishing the flow to our server. It's done. Now, those of you who publish dashboards know that after every publication, you will get a pop-up showing you where the dashboard has been published to. Well, the cool thing is it's the same thing with Tableau Prep flows. So it says publishing complete. This was the flow. A really nice feature is that you even get visually a thumbnail. It's not even a thumbnail, it's a big, nice overview of how it looks. If you have given it tags, it will show. But now, the flow is on there, which means that I and other people capable of it can run it whenever I feel like. I could click run and then it would run. But you see, it has been never run before. But what you can do then is add a schedule to it. If you say like, okay, it totally makes no sense to run it daily because it is monthly data. Imagine that the export arrives there at 12 on the 1st of the month, and you want it to be picked up overnight. You can click on the flow. Now, the second thing you can decide, and this is really the beautiful thing of it, a flow can have multiple outputs. In a little flow, I made it at one output, but you could have, for example, a huge transaction file for multiple countries, and you want to make available for specific countries, for example, Belgium, France, and Germany. These could be 3 different outputs. Imagine that for some reason the data for Germany or for France isn't necessary anymore. You can here actually select whether you want to run the full flow with all its inputs. Let me zoom in. Or that you can select the output which should be run. So if you have multiple outputs here in this list, you will see multiple outputs as well. So you can play around with the granularity of your data and which flow parts should be executed and which not. Then you can click Create Task. And that should be it. Then for IT and BI, you have a very nice overview of all the job runs of the prep flows on your server. So here you see job ID, status of the flow, the priority it has been given to run, because sometimes things are scheduled at the same time, it needs to prioritize, etc., etc. When it has run, you can also identify badly designed flows, slow flows, because you get a runtime, the queue time, the average runtime, because maybe there was some momentary hiccup. So you probably want to look at the average runtime in this case. Then next to that, you also have the tasks view, where when you click on actual flows, we see that here on this specific site, we have deployed 2 flows to our server. We see the schedule, priority status, whether that flow has been scheduled to run, and the last time the prep flow has run. So this gives a lot of opportunities, new opportunities for dealing with your data, starting from a published data source, doing something with it, publishing it somewhere else. Good. Let's go back to prep. We have focused on the connection, on potential cleaning, and on writing. But I now want to show you how you can make use of prep for combining data via a join. Let me see whether I've set everything. Okay. I'm going to remove this. I will take the time at the end to browse through your questions and to see whether I can, which one I'm going to answer. All right, I'm going to remove my connection here, and I'm going to connect to Superstores. Those working with Tableau Desktop know the data set most of the time because it's a pre-made data set. So I'm going to click text file. No, it's an Excel, sorry. And there it is. Now, what's the difference with previous situation? And what we've seen now, we've done a union, putting data which has the same format under each other and stacking it. Now, in Superstore, the story is differently. We have this Excel with multiple tabs, where we have the orders. Let me just drag it on to give you an idea what the data is we're working with. We do know how to add the clean step by now. So what do we have? We have a row ID or typical order IDs. The order was made on a specific date. The order was shipped on a specific date. It can be shipped in first class, same class, etc., etc. And I hope this screen already becomes a little bit more familiar for you, because what are all these things? Well, we do know that these are actually distribution graphs of my data. For example, what do we easily can see if we sort it here? Most of my postal codes are 10,035. If I sort this, most of my orders were made in the West, at least at the row level. Which categories are doing best? Of supplies sells most, not most turnover maybe, but at least most at the transactional level. So this is a bigger data set. But imagine that you want to join in some information. Typically, it's 2020, people order something online and they return it, for example. However, that information about whether something is returned or not resides in another data set. So in this case, I have this information about my orders, which are being returned in a separate file, maybe even a separate database. I can drag on the returns tab, and let's have a look what's in there. And actually pretty straightforward. I have an order ID with the yes label. So it basically means that this is the full list of all the orders which got returned in the past up till now. Good. How do I join this information in Tableau Prep together so I can analyze it further? Well, it's pretty easy. I can just take my step, and we're not going to do the union, which we did earlier, but now we will take the join functionality. And there's quite a bit going on right here, so let me guide you through it. My advice would be, and it's a general advice when working with data, making data flows, is to monitor the number of rows you actually have at all times. How do you do that in Prep? Let me go one step back. So I here see that I have, let me zoom in, 21K rows. So I just want to join in the fact whether the specific order got returned or not. So I want to keep an equal amount of rows after my join. Here I see, for example, that 296 orders got returned. So we're going to join. And when doing a join, at least you need to define a key on how you want to enrich the one source with the other. It's pretty clean interface, it's nicely color-coded, etc. But how do we need to read it? So under the settings, you can choose your join classes. The nice thing with Tableau and also Tableau Prep is the fact that if you have equally named column names, it will automatically assume that this is your join key. This has advantages, but sometimes it just puts in everything and then you need to remove a few keys. But in this particular case, we are going to join information on the order ID. So from my left data set, which is orangey colored, you nicely see I'm taking the order key, order ID. And from the right one is also called order ID. I will put that in the join. Now, those of you who are familiar with joins probably know that you have this thing called an inner join, left join, full outer join. Well, in Tableau Prep, and let me zoom in, it's as easy as just selecting which part you need or don't need. If I want to do an analysis on the orders, on only the orders who got returned, I would choose here to do an inner join, which would result in a data set only containing the returned ones. I could do a left join, keeping all the orders, but including the information whether it got returned or not. So let me see. What we want is that we keep the same number of rows before and after the join because we just enrich the information in. So here we see we have 10K rows, and after a join we have 10K rows. What else is there? You can see which information is actually being joined and which ones are being mismatched. So by selecting and deselecting the checkbox here. We will go into this later as well. Okay, so I have enriched the information, so I expect that information to be there somewhere. And the nice thing is that Tableau also color codes the columns where it comes from. So if I'm going to browse here, I'm expecting to find a return field. So here you nicely see that the return field has been added to my view. If you're working with big data sets, you saw that I didn't feel like scrolling the whole way to it and visually queuing where the column resides. Just type in to check whether the column is there, and then you see it has null, of course, for the records which didn't were returned, and a yes for the ones who were. So it nicely has joined it in. Good. Another thing I want to join in is the regional responsible people, the people who are responsible for a specific region. Let me quickly show you how that data looks like. So I'm going to drag in from the left data from a new tab like this. I'm going to add a clean step to it to browse it. There's not too much going on, but it's just getting an idea on how to enrich information. So we have these names: Anna, Chuck, Kelly, Cassandra, who are respectively responsible for the West, East, Central, and South. Let's do another join. I grab my step, I hover over it, and I'm not going to do a union, I'm going to do a join. And again, Tableau by default will check whether there is a region column. So yes, in this output there is a region column, and yes, in this output there is a region column. So they do match. I only want to work with the records where there is a match between the regions. So I'm gonna keep this on inner join. And I'm going to continue and see whether the enrichment has taken place. So what I now assume is that, let me browse through it. I now nicely have the notion of the regions together with the names in my data set, which is the case. One thing I didn't inform you about is when you join in information from another source, the common fields get joined in as well. So why do I, let me show you, if I look for region, I now have two columns called region. Yeah, that's logic because in the people tab, we have the column called region, and same thing for my other input file or tab better. So I can safely remove this, and that's that. Okay, cool. So multiple data sources can join in information. Of course, you can combine this with the union, which we saw earlier. And then, of course, we could write it to a place where we need it. Let me see, think whether I need to say anything extra about the interface at this point. We told about the views, how we can rename them. Let me see here. So yeah, you can filter the values here. Oh yeah, the automatic split is maybe interesting for all those who work with data. For example, we see here our order ID, which is already a concatenation of the state in which or to which it's being sold, the year is being sold, and a unique identifier at the end of the string for the specific order. Now imagine that the information contained in this column is useful for you, and then when going to Tableau Desktop, you want to do analysis on it. There is this nice feature in Tableau Prep, which allows you to just split it. What is splitting? Those of you working with Excel doing data to columns, you specify a delimiter, and then it will split over a few columns. So if you have a concatenated column, or in this case, the order ID, which is a concatenation of multiple values, you can put them separate in respectively 3 columns in this case. If you select automatic split, let me zoom in, then Tableau Prep will do its best to identifying the delimiter. But if it's a comma, a dot, an asterisk, a backward slash, for example, you can select custom split and define how you want to do the split. But for now, we will go with automatic split. I'm going to click on it. There we go. Let me put them next to each other. So I'm going to drag order ID in front. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. I'm going to drag it in front. So the first part, the notion whether, I said state, but actually it's country, so it's both Canada and the US, nicely parsed into a column. So I'm going to call this country. It already exists. Let me call it location. Then secondly, we see that the order ID has nicely parsed out the year. Be careful. Some people don't like the fact that it's being formatted with a dot here. The reason for that is that Tableau still sees it as a measure. So if you really want to have these year numbers as a string, you can click on it and set it to string like this. And then of course the order ID, can stay order ID. And I'm gonna call it order ID key. Now, those of you who watch carefully probably see that here's something weird going on, because it looks that Tableau Prep has binned the order IDs, which really doesn't make that much sense because it's really not a numeric value. Also, the same here for ship date. You might think, huh, do I only have like 4 or 5 ship dates? No. The whole idea is that Tableau Prep tries, when browsing through these columns, to group these values in a way that you visually can browse through them as easily as possible. So if that really bothers you, and in some cases it will, you can turn it off. So for example, for the ship date, instead of having it for a range, you can click on ship date and set it, let's zoom, from summary to detail. So instead of having the ranges, it will set it to the summary. And here you nicely have, again, all your shipping dates. Same thing for order dates. If you want to see the actual order dates, there you go. Let's do it for the order ID key as well, because it doesn't make sense there. There you go. You nicely have all the order ID keys available. Good. What else is there? There are still other stuff you can do. There's still a lot of stuff to do, but as this is a basic introduction, we won't go too deep into it. Let's see. Renaming a field, we've discussed that. Of course, you can duplicate a field. You can keep a field only. We will talk about creating calculated fields in a bit. But what is really, really nice as well is you might have been thinking like, oh my God, this Tableau Prep is pretty cool, but I'm capable of doing that. But my other, maybe slightly less technical colleague, although she's a very good analyst, she's not really familiar with this ETL kind of stuff. What you could do is select your analysis, then right-click to it, right-click on it, and save these steps as a flow, which can be used in 2 ways. One way is that you can save it to a file, then actually Tableau Prep packages all these steps nicely into a file, and then your colleague or yourself at the later moment in time can just insert all these steps for your next analysis. If you're doing the same operations just on different data, save your operations to a file and load it again at a later time. But even more interesting is that if you as a company want to share specific types of transformations across a team or even maybe across departments, you can publish what I have done here to a server, which gives me then the possibility, and let me just, I don't know whether I'm configured to do it, but let me just give it a try. So again, I give it a very bad name, my first saved step. I use this to perform some joins. I can publish it to the report. Now, what does that mean? Where is it? Well, the steps, and as you can see, Tableau nicely shows it to you. This flow has not been scheduled. It's just available on the server for other people to use in their flows. How do they retrieve it? Well, wherever you right click in your flow, and I think, no, you need to right click in the white space, you here see that you can insert a specific flow. So instead of starting all over, your colleague is capable of or selecting locally a prep flow you have sent to him, or even better, because it's a more centralized way of dealing with these flows, you can just load it from the server. So I have just saved my first step. I'm going to click on it, and I am going to add it. And there you go. I have loaded all these steps from server, not having the need to do it all over again. All right. Let's go to the next use case where you can use Tableau Prep in your daily lives. And I'm going to close this one for a second. I'm going to open this file. I'm going to open a file which I have prepared in the sense that I have already made the connection. So you have TFL format, which is the prep flow with the references to the connections, or you have TFLX file, which is just like in Tableau Desktop, a packaged version of your flow. In Tableau Desktop, it means that all your data is contained in your file. Well, in this case, it's the same. So it's the prep flow plus the actual data. And I'm going to open it. Let me zoom out. Okay, I saved it. So we are looking at a new data set. It's called consumer prices. And what is particular in this data set, and why have I picked this out? Because there was a time where working with Tableau Desktop, you would assume that all of your data was nicely in place, but then somebody sent you files like this, and then you would go, oh my God, the values I would expect to be in my dimensions, there are in the columns. And although you have the pivot function these days in Tableau, I want to show you that you can easily actually perform what they call a columns to rows operation in Tableau as well. What does that mean? If I want to have a dimension with the year, let me put it this way. If I want to visualize all of this in Tableau Desktop, it's definitely possible, making use of measure names and measure values, if that does ring a bell to you. However, if I am in the front seat of choosing how my data will look like to do this kind of analysis, I probably will opt to pivot it first before I start analyzing it. So what do we have here? Just to make sure that we know what we're working with, we have information about the area. We have a specific item what the data is about to seek consumer prices, most of the time consumer prices of food, general products, etc. It's actually a data set with economical indicators for specific countries. Having said that, I want to perform a pivot. I want to pivot all these columns. So I click pivot. Which columns do I want to pivot? Well, here it says column to rows, so that's good. The only thing I need to do is tell Tableau Prep which columns he needs to transpose from columns to rows. So holding Shift, I have done a multiple selection. So I drag them in. And I can call this one year. And I'll call this one values. Now, let's have a look what we have done. And you now nicely see I have these years as a dimension, and I have my values nicely next to it, which is awesome. And then, yeah, okay, for completeness, you probably noticed I don't like the Y in front of it. So let me just quickly remove it using clean, remove letters. There you go, it disappeared. And I can write it somewhere, be it on my desktop or to the server. So that's how you can use pivoting. One more thing. Whenever I get questions at the client, a lot of times it is about performance of dashboards. And to show you that, I'm going to quickly connect to the Superstore's dataset again. So I'm going Microsoft Excel, sample Superstore. And I will start with the orders. A lot of reporting, a lot of companies is on the monthly level, while as a lot of data at the same moment in time is at the transactional level. Although as an analyst, you sometimes want to have the freedom and you want to retain the most granular data when working with Tableau Desktop. When it comes to performance, sometimes it is better to aggregate your data first before making a report on it. Tableau will be performant up to millions and millions of rows, but the moment it becomes very complex, you might consider aggregating your data and then visualizing it. What do I mean? So I'm again connected to my orders file. I'm going to prove it. Here's the data again. Now imagine that I don't need to have all the order information, but that for the report that I am building, I only need the year, the month, and let's say the subcategory of my products. Then I can make use of a feature we haven't discussed today yet, and it's called the aggregate function. Now, what does that do? Those of you familiar with Tableau Desktop, it comes pretty close to actually doing some sort of LOD, doing a group by for others. So if I click on aggregate, and I said we want to group the information based on shipping year. Ooh, very interesting. I don't have that. Let's go back and let's make it. So I'm going back and this is nice. One of the new features is that you can convert it to date and time, but I'm going to create a calculated field. I'm going to call it year shipping date. You can extract the year value out of the shipping date simply by typing year shipping date. I click OK, and I have that. I also need the month, so I will create a calculate field, year shipping date, a month shipping date, sorry, like this. And then I'm ready to do my aggregation, because now what we need to define here is on which fields do I want to group and on which fields do I want to aggregate. So I just told you that I want to do that on the year of the shipping date, which I prefer to be a string because otherwise we have this dot together with, please notice that I tend to use the search icon because in reality, you will end up with data sets with maybe hundreds of columns. You don't want to spend your time scrolling. So if I know that I have a month value somewhere, just type in MO, grab the field and add it on there. You nicely already get a preview of what you're constituting. So then, last but not least, I want to have my sales as an aggregated field. So literally what we're doing, we are aggregating on the year, month basis. I don't only want to have the sales, I also want to have my profit. So from the left, I take profit and I drag it into my aggregated fields. there's probably some other field I want. Let's say that I want to, no, I'm good to go. Sales and profit. I'm adding a clean step to preview my data and look at that. I now have an aggregation of year and month, but I said subcategory as well. So we go back, add subcategory to it, drag and drop it in. As you see, Tableau on the spot recalculates it. Why are we doing this? If you could, of course, go into Tableau and start analyzing this, and you have 10K of rows, but now I only have 800 rows. This is a reduction by more than 10. If it comes down to performance, you will probably at least double your speed working with big data sets. So I'm now ready to go to analyze this in Tableau, making only use of a fraction of the rows I would have normally loaded. Good. Next thing is maybe a little bit more complex, but imagine that, okay, let's just go to Tableau. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to preview it in Tableau Desktop. And it should open up. And there it is. All right, so you want to drag on your year. You want to have your sales. You want to see the part that the subcategories have in those sales. And then you could perform a percent of total along the columns. This is for those who are familiar with Tableau. I have relatively quickly, it's not a good graph, but you get the sake of it. I can see that in 2014, 16% of my sales were generated by chairs, for example. Now, the thing which is being calculated here is a table calculation, which requires resources from Tableau. You might come in situations where you want to pre-calculate these kind of things. So what you potentially could do is calculate the yearly totals for the year and join them in before writing them to your server. What does that mean? So, okay, I'm gonna add a cleaning step here, sorry, like this. And I'm going to calculate the yearly totals by the aggregate function. I drag in year. I drag in my sales. And I'm going to show you, I have now made a little in-between table, which has the year totals. Let me quickly set this to string like this. And yeah, okay, maybe we can round it to a whole. It doesn't make much sense, the numbers after the comma. Now, how can I now calculate the percentage up front? Okay, I want to do it on the monthly level, so let me add month as well. So there you go. Now what I can do is take the output and join it back in. And the key will be the month of the shipping dates and the year of the shipping date. All right, let me now give things a meaningful name and remove fields if we don't need them. So this is a duplicate, so I'm going to remove it. This is a duplicate, so I'm going to remove this one as well. But this is the interesting one because this is the total sales for each month in that specific year. So I'm going to call it total sales. And now I am capable of actual, let me quickly double check. Now I am capable of calculating the percentages on the row level before going to Tableau, which would be as easy as doing sales divided by total sales. And I will call this percentage of sales. And of course, I could multiply it by 100 to put it to a percentage. So let me go back, put it between brackets. All right, and now we nicely have the share of the subcategories for each month. And you can just drag in the percentage field and you don't need to let Tableau Desktop calculate it for you. And of course, we can write it to the server. Okay, I've come to the end of the exercises I want to show you. There's this one feature, or there are a few features we haven't discussed because this is just the basis. But as you might have noticed, you can also insert scripts in your flow. And it has arrived only since a few versions, but it has brought a lot of possibilities to Tableau Prep. What does it actually mean? Well, you can add a script to your flow, and it can be for the data crunchers or data scientists out there, make use of an server to run R code in Tableau Prep, and you can even run Python code. The only thing you need for doing that is having one of these two installed on your computer and up and running. I will now conclude with shortly giving you insight in how you would do this if you want to do your analysis. So in the case you want to make connection to TabPy, let me bring in my terminal. You would need to boot your TabPy, make sure that it's running. This is the thing you want to see. I have started locally and it's running on port 904. Using this information, I can establish the actual connection. So I'm going to click on connect. As I'm connecting to a local TabPy, I can type in localhost 9004. Of course, in a business environment, it would be with a named login, preferably with a SSL secured connection, with a TabPy server, which doesn't run locally on my machine, but somewhere on a remote instance, probably shared across multiple people. But for the use case here, I'm just going to connect to it locally. Then you need to connect to a file, of course. So maybe I can show you something very easily. All right, let me show you. We are pretty competitive at Biztory at times. So we are building this little thingy, which, and I can talk about it as Tableau is a Salesforce company. We have this thing called Trailhead, where we all have these nice logins and where we earn badges by following online tutorials. So this is a website, but there is also a possibility, and hopefully this doesn't take too long, to connect to an API via Tableau Prep to get in that sort of information. So imagine that I want to load via an API this information. That could be done using Tableau Prep as well. How would you go about? Well, here you need to specify a Python file, and I'll show it to you how it looks like. Let me get it for you. Need to close this one. Sorry for some people, it might get a little bit technical right now, but what I want to demonstrate is that we've only scratched the surface of the possibilities of Tableau Prep, and combining it with these kind of scripts, the sky is the limit. So here we're doing an API request to an open API URL. We're going to retrieve a few types of information which we can get via the URL. So how would you go about in doing that? So I'm going back to my prep. I'm going to connect to this little file I have prepared for doing that. It should be in here somewhere. Maybe if we do a follow-up, we could go deeper into it, but the whole idea is that when using scripts, you can or make use of something which could come close to data scaffolding. So you provided a little file having the columns which you expect to receive. Then we're going to add the script to it. I'm going to connect to my Tableau server. I'm gonna give in localhost port 904. I'm gonna sign in. I'm going to point Tableau Prep to the specific file, which in my case is my personal data. The function name is important. Those familiar with Python probably know that you can create functions in it. In this particular case, the name of the function, is called get, let me zoom in, get trailhead. So we can call this function from Tableau Prep. I'm going to type it in, get trailhead. It's all live, so things can go wrong. Let me just see. So it's running, but I'm getting this error. Let me see whether I've filled it in all correctly. Let's do it again. Okay, it's interesting. An integer type is required for the field ID. So I have defined that ID is a number, but actually I do know that the ID is a long string, so I'm going to correct that. I also know that the rank label, which should come to prep, is a string. I'm going to put it to string, and now I would, I'm going to cross my fingers. It didn't save, it didn't save it. Okay, and there we go. We have extracted data into Tableau Prep using a script, and I here now have my personal data. Just to give you an insight, if you feel this is interesting, you're at your company playing around with Python, scripts, etc., do a request Biztory, and maybe we can do a follow-up question for Tableau Prep using scripts. Being 10 to 12, I'm going to stop here. I'm open for any comments, be it via the chat, be it via email or a Biztory website. Comments, remarks, more than welcome. We at Biztory are driven by feedback and being self-critical, so shoot. If you have requests, tell them to us. And I will now quickly have a look at the Q&A and see whether there are still some questions going on. Let me see. Can you set it up so processes all files in a folder and the flow branches off to a separate flow based on criteria in the file name? Depending on how I interpret it, it's okay. Let me drag on the questions field for you to see, because it's here. So if I understood correctly, so yes, Tableau can process all the files in a specific folder. We demoed it with using the wildcard unions. You can put them together nicely in a file and write them somewhere. Regarding the question about doing the calculated field in prep versus desktop, is there a performance benefit, or is it more a case of it, you're sure you want to have it and why not do it there rather than here being built for any benefit. I can be very brief on that. I love Tableau Desktop, and I would not do it in prep unless it's for performance reasons or the ease of the person who needs to work with the data. If I do it, it is always for performance reasons, because if you're skilled in Tableau Desktop, there's always a way of getting there. But if your report is getting slower, then my recommendation would be do it in Tableau Desktop. Can we manage a paginated REST API? That is possible, but it will require development of a Python code which does the pagination and the API calls for you. If you're interested in that, we have such examples, get in touch, but it is possible, but it's not out of the box possible, but definitely using the scripts. Is it possible to name the month instead of numbering them? I haven't dived into that, but indeed in the examples I have used, I always took the month out of and use it as a number, but there is a wide, and I can show it to you really easily, a wide dictionary of date field manipulations. So if you just open up a calculated field, you can get the month labels out of it using the functions. You can even create a date based on a string. You can do differences between two dates, deltas between two dates, parse information from a date. So yes, that's definitely possible. What would be the formula if you'd want to replace the dash symbol only if it's at the beginning of the ID? If it's always at the left, you can literally use the left function and do a replace on there, so that shouldn't be a problem. Can we copy a calculated field so we can change the formula, such as field name? Yes, I haven't showed that maybe, but wherever you are, you can always right-click on it, duplicate the field. If you want to keep it, for example, both coded as with an interpretable business explanation. So just right-click on it and duplicate the field, and you are good to go. I have most of the time deleted all the redundant columns because I wanted to keep my data sets as lean as possible. Can one flow call another? I'm not sure whether that's the case, but it's possible in that sense that you can schedule your prep flows, and by making intelligent use of the scheduling, you can chain the flows, but there is no, but I need to have a look at it. It's not really possible to start the flow and let the second flow in your flow start when the first one is done. But making intelligent use of the schedules, this kind of behavior should be possible. Then last question. So Tableau Prep is set up data and Tableau Desktop for presentation. I would agree with that. Although Tableau Prep can be part of the exploration part, getting a grip on your data, seeing how the distributions of your values behave. It's purely focused on the preparation of it. So yes, I would say Tableau Prep is ETL, prepare your data, whereas Tableau Desktop is more for the visualization. Okay, then there is only one thing left. Thank you for attending